In emergency management, the definition of a stakeholder is any person or entity with a vested interest in the survival or recovery of a given community.
This is the Stakeholder Prepping Podcast, where the tactical comes from the practical, and today, you become your own stakeholder.
Here are your hosts, Chris and AC.
Welcome back to Stakeholder Prepping, where you, yes, you are the stakeholder in your own survival, and where we cut through the noise, build real capability, and help you become prepared and resilient as the stakeholder that your family needs. Because today, AC, we're talking about something that most people completely misunderstand, which is what actually happens after a disaster, who responds, when they show up, how recovery really works. We're talking the NGOs, the insurance companies, the local, state, tribal, federal government, private volunteer groups, everyone that can have an influence and change the game. So if you've ever wondered what the real timeline of recovery looks like, this one's for you.
Yeah, and spoiler alert here, it's slower and messier and more bureaucratic than you think. But, uh, you know, when you understand the players, you can kind of understand the gaps. And that's where prepping becomes the difference maker, if you will. And this is kind of the episode to talk about what really happens after a disaster. And we say disaster, Chris. I think in this one, we're talking about like the federally declared disaster thing, right? Whether this is an earthquake or a volcano or a giant hurricane or whatever kind of apocalyptic event, asteroids, aliens, whatever. But this is like the real federal disaster, the declared disaster, the disaster where the National Guard is activated, and then kind of what happens after that. After the disaster's gone, the flood subsides and the winds die down, what are you going to expect from the government and those non-governmental organizations? What's going to happen afterwards?
Right. A state of emergency has been declared
Yep.
in these scenarios. So we're not looking at, oh, I got a flat tire and I didn't make it to work on time, so I got fired. We're looking at, I don't have a house anymore because the tornado just tore it apart. And I mean, even recently in November, I believe it was November 25th, just 3 days before Thanksgiving, there was a tornado in Houston that devastated over 100 homes. So it can happen anytime, any place.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It can happen anywhere. So it's not, yeah, I guess people need to understand that I think a lot of people will listen to these kinds of things and look at this title of the episode and say, where I am, a disaster just isn't going to strike, so I don't need to know what's going to happen afterwards, or I'm totally self sufficient and I don't need anybody's help. But that's just not the prepper way. Even if that's not your primary, this may be your emergency or your extreme is knowing what to expect when something does happen to your house, when there is some catastrophic event, and just knowing what's going to happen procedurally, I think is just going to take a lot of that stress away when you've got a lot of questions in a stressful environment after a very stressful event.
Well, absolutely. So let's get into it. Let's start at ground zero. The disaster hits and it does all of its damage. Storm winds die down, shaking stops, fire line retreats. Who is actually there? Because it's not
FEMA.
FEMA.
Oh, it's not FEMA.
It's not FEMA.
It's
It's
not.
it's not even the state, and it's definitely not your insurance company.
It's
It's
local.
local.
It's
Local.
local.
There you go.
It's local. So it's the fire departments, it's the EMS, it's the police, it's the local search and rescue teams. These are the people doing the life saving work in those first minutes and hours after something happens. They're the people that are clearing the roads and shutting off the gas lines to your houses and businesses and pulling people out of the collapsed structures, dealing with the injuries. And honestly, they're usually very overwhelmed very quickly.
And that's a very, very good point. In tribal communities, tribal governments play a similar role, but tribal emergency managers and police, tribal health departments, they run their own response structure and they have really strong community ties, but they often have limited equipment or manpower. And on reservations, geography makes things even tougher. There's not a whole lot of reservations that have completely paved roads all the way through. It's backcountry in a lot of places.
Yeah, the disaster response, depending on where you are, and yes, if it's in a like tribal lands can be completely different, but depending on where you are, that disaster response is going to be a little different. And this is the part that the public often forgets is if the event is big enough, then help is maybe hours away. And if it's really, really big, then maybe help is days away, especially if we're talking about commuter routes are blocked, if the road system is totally blocked, which is why the standard advice in the emergency management world is always be ready for at least 72 hours of self reliance. And that's not coming from a place of, you know, you're going to be okay after 72 hours. It's just that hopefully somebody can get to you after 72 hours.
Yeah, honestly, in a major disaster, 72 hours of self-reliance is optimistic.
Yeah. And
You're
once those like
you're on
locals.
the sorry, you're on the edge of survival for 72 straight hours.
Right, you're 100% on your own probably if the network is down, if you know, the roadways are down, all those kinds of things, and then once the locals are tapped out, the next layer becomes the state, and the big one I think people usually think about is the National Guard, like, something happens and the National Guard is just gonna roll right in.
Yeah, the guard is kind of like the state's toolbox go-to for emergencies, for they can help with evacuations, traffic control, debris removal, search and rescue. They have all sorts of tools at their disposal and equipment. Logistics, they're incredibly versatile, but they're not instantaneous. Mobilizing takes time. And this is where a lot of people don't realize that the way the National Guard deploys, those National Guardsmen and women were at home and went through the same disaster you did, and then they have to get called back in, get to their reporting station, get all of their equipment, and then deploy from there. So, depending on how bad the disaster is, you may or may not have National Guard support for a few hours, a few days. If it's a really bad earthquake, it could be a few weeks before you really have help coming from your own state, which is why so many municipalities and even states have mutual aid agreements. So if the big one in California happens, there's a network of National Guard responders that would fill in for California National Guardsmen who were injured or cannot get to their reporting station. So it does take time.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. When you think about the National Guard, a lot of people don't think about that. They are generally just as affected in their personal lives as you. That's like the National Guard recruitment commercial is like, live at home and serve your community. Well, what that means is they're also pretty screwed when something happens because they are your next door neighbors. And now, yeah, they got called up and they have to go help. So it may be hard for them just to get to the armory and get to their muster point and then go help serve their community. So you're exactly right that that's the whole point of the National Guard is that they're local, but because they're local, that makes their job a little more difficult because they're affected by the same exact emergency as you are, right?
Right. And the governor has to declare a state of emergency or have authorization to deploy the National Guard in their own state. They can't just, say, "Hey, Private Smith, hey,
Hmm.
Corporal Jackson, why don't you go over there and go get me a cup of coffee? I want it from this very specific coffee shop and you're at my disposal." They have to have orders. There has to be a declaration of emergency. Even when it comes to riots and, implementing police functions or assisting police functions, that has to be authorized and ordered by the state's governor.
Right. So probably what's going to happen is the emergency management agencies are going to get activated first pretty quickly. Like in Texas, they have TDEM, and then in California, it's like Cal OES. But those emergency management offices will get spooled up and they kind of become the nerve center. Their job is resource allocation and coordination and linking local requests to federal assistance and all that kind of stuff. So they spool up those emergency management agencies pretty quickly, and then they kind of become the nerve center of that operation pretty quickly. But they don't necessarily have resources to go do anything. They start planning logistics, but it's not like all of the resources they need just show up immediately.
Right. And here's a key point that a lot of listeners should understand: it all moves upwards. Local requests help, local asks state, state asks federal. It takes time, and it takes a lot of time in a big event. This is not deploying the US military where we can have a Burger King on the ground at any point in on the planet's surface within 24 hours. This is emergency response. It's not a planned deployment. So things are a lot different and it takes a little bit to get the wheels moving.
Yeah, we sure can like deploy a pop-up McDonald's pretty quickly though, can't we?
Oh, yes.
I mean,
And
if you need one of those, like a concert or something, we got you covered. But yeah, emergency management does take a little more time than that. And then there's EMAC, which is the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, where states sort of help other states. This is that mutual aid you were talking about. But even EMAC assets still need transport and staging and management and logistical services and all those kinds of things that go along with it. So this is why you cannot depend on the state government to just swoop in within hours and save everybody and feed everybody and clothe and house everybody, because it just doesn't happen that quickly.
I completely agree. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Is right over your shoulder. It's FEMA.
FEMA and the evil FEMA camps. But yeah, FEMA is not a first responder organization. They don't show up with helicopters or medics or rescue teams. That's not actually what FEMA does. FEMA is a financial and coordination engine. FEMA is the glue, if you will. They can help power some of these efforts. They are basically the money, the grants, the reimbursement, the assistance programs, but FEMA isn't the first responder.
And before FEMA does anything of significance, including planning or deployment or anything, the Stafford Act process has to
What's
kick
that?
in.
Stafford
So,
Act?
yeah, the Stafford Act is the Emergency Management Act. It has been amended a few times since 9/11, but long story short, it breaks down to this: the governor requests FEMA from the president. The president approves, and then FEMA activates its programs. And individual assistance, like you know, flood programs and checks for your house and things like that, that's not guaranteed. Public assistance is slow, but before FEMA does anything, the Stafford Act has to be approved. So the state governor where the disaster happened has to put in a request for FEMA assistance. That gets approved by the president and then they deploy. So they already know what's going on and know that there was a disaster before they get boots on the ground, but it's going to take some time to get boots on the ground.
That's really interesting. Okay. And then obviously there's always a Coast Guard component too. And Coast Guard isn't everywhere, right? They are actually a first responder, but they're more for the hurricanes or the coastal areas. They do happen to have helicopters, which are handy, but the Coast Guard, they're not going to show up if there's an earthquake in the middle of Kansas, probably. But in these coastal areas and in hurricane zones, the Coast Guard is actually a first responder agency that can get spooled up pretty quickly. And I have worked with a number of these Coast Guard units, and the Coast Guard will set up like a command center during some disasters by using their standardized incident command system, ICS. And that is basically a scalable organizational structure based on the National Incident Management System, or NIMS. There are so many cool acronyms. You know it's federal when there's acronyms.
Oh yeah, and
Like
NIMS is awesome. I love
NIMS
using
NIMS is
NIMS.
amazing. And yeah, absolutely. So this is the incident management system, and this allows for an integrated response across to these different jurisdictions by deploying this pre-organized incident management team, the IMT, and they have personnel like an incident commander. They have PIOs, so public information officers, and they have officers for planning and logistics and operations. And the team uses standardized forms and hierarchy structure to manage resources, coordinate efforts, and maintain situational awareness. Now, this is the thing with the Coast Guard is you do want them around. Like if there is a disaster, the Coast Guard, they get spooled up quickly, their boots on the ground, they have really cool helicopters, and they know how to handle this kind of thing, but they're just not everywhere. And then obviously the Department of Defense can help too, but only in a support role unless some very specific and special conditions are met.
Yeah, and that being the Posse Comitatus Act, you can't violate that and have military operating as police without a pre-authorization. So really what we're looking at is all of this takes 48 to 96 hours to become fully operational in most big disasters. So if something big enough happens that FEMA is getting called in, you are likely on your own for a while. It may be longer than that 72-hour kit that you've got stashed away in the closet.
Yeah, and I guess that'd be the big take home point for people that are subject to disasters in their area. Maybe you need to start thinking maybe this is a great time to turn that 72-hour kit into a 96-hour kit. Like that's a very easy uh kind of the low-hanging fruit of prepping that you could just turn that 72-hour kit that you've got into a 96-hour kit, and you're just going to be that much more prepared for these kinds of things. And now obviously we talk about the NGOs. These are the non-governmental organizations, and they're kind of the heart of the humanitarian response to these disasters. That's the Red Cross is the big one, but there's the Salvation Army, there's the Southern Baptists, there's Catholic Charities, all these people. Team Rubicon, they do some really cool stuff. Like Team Rubicon goes out with chainsaws and they clear the roads. And
Hmm.
and they're just this is the NGOs. These are the people that they're doing this not because they have to, but because they want to. And that's those kinds of NGOs that go out and in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. The Red Cross, they're going to show up, they're going to provide immediate relief, including shelter and food, and they have their comfort kits and their hygiene kits that they pass out. And in fact, it's funny, I bought a couple of these like they're the Red Cross hygiene kits, and they were like government surplus, and I have one of those in the back of all of my vehicles because it's just a little, it's like a Ziploc bag, like a 1 gallon Ziploc bag with kind of everything you need, all the sanitation and hygiene you need for, that couple of days. But I found them for, just a few bucks on government surplus, and it's your toothbrush and your toothpaste and your all of your deodorant, your hair stuff, and all those kinds of things. So anyway,
Interesting.
yeah, it's kind of cool, but you can find these at surplus, and that's what the Red Cross will hand out, and they'll obviously do like the emergency shelters. They provide safe places to stay. Now, this is usually going to be that emergency big giant tent or a gymnasium or something. This isn't going to be the Waldorf Astoria or the Hyatt. This is going to be just something to keep the water off of you. But the Red Cross will show up, they'll do it, but it's just not going to be super comfortable. They want to keep you alive. So the food and the water, they will distribute hot meals and clean water. Obviously, health services, they will have emergency first aid. They'll have mental health support, which is a really big one. The Red Cross will show up with mental health providers, and they'll have assistance from medical teams. Like they can replace prescriptions or medical equipment. Like if your CPAP gets washed away or something, the Red Cross can help out with that kind of stuff. And then, like I said, the comfort and hygiene kits, and then some financial assistance. They will provide emergency financial help for immediate needs like that temporary lodging, clothing, transportation, things like that. But it's not going to be comfortable to just say I'll rely on the Red Cross because I know they'll do the right thing, which is true. You're not going to be comfortable. It's good to have your own back in those kinds of situations because you probably don't want to sleep in a gymnasium with 8,500 of your closest friends.
And really, what you're looking at there, what a lot of people refer to as FEMA camps are not. They're actually Red Cross camps.
That's
A-
right. Yeah.
And if you're outside of the US, there is no Red Cross. Instead, it's the Red Crescent. So, Red Cross or Red Crescent, if you're in Asia, it's the Red Crescent. Um, but that's the counterpart to the International Red Cross is IRCC, International Red Cross slash Crescent. They're two organizations that do the same thing, just depending on what the primary or dominant religion of the area is. That's where that cross or crescent happens to occur. Just if you happen to be in a state with a disaster, don't expect to go into a building that has a green cross on it because you're going to get really high really fast going into
Red
a
Cross.
marijuana
Got it.
dispensary.
So if you are, if you are colorblind, then disasters might not be for you.
Then we might want to look at the sign on the door and
Mhm.
figure out
Yep.
what it is. But
Yep.
let's talk about one of the fastest groups on scene. And this is kind of that first responder energy that they're bringing. But private volunteer groups like United Cajun Navy.
Yeah. Dude, they're awesome. The Cajun Navy, I just like seeing them whenever something goes down. I mean, I don't want to see them personally because I want to watch them on TV because that means it's not happening to me, but they are incredible and flat structure, fast moving, and extremely motivated. They'll deploy their little boats before the state has even sent out a press release. And their strengths are that speed and agility. They can move very quickly. They can mobilize very quickly. They can get boots on the ground. They can get boats in the water. But the weakness is there's a huge coordination challenge with them, especially with official agencies that are, they have communication friction. They don't want to look at them as an official first responder. There is definitely some friction between Cajun Navy and the official channels and the official first responders.
Yes. And that's unfortunate, but you get too many hands in the cookie jar and it's bound to happen.
That's right. Yep.
And in a lot of communities, like especially in the Southeast, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, volunteer groups are the difference between rescue and tragedy when it comes to getting people off of their roofs because they didn't have time to evacuate or rescuing people from floodwaters. It happens all the time when we're talking about hurricanes. Even search and rescue teams, cadaver dogs, search and rescue dogs. There's all sorts of effort that goes into it. And these volunteer groups, they put in a lot of the legwork that local, tribal, state, federal, they just don't have the capability to do.
Yeah, and obviously there's the spontaneous volunteers. These are the neighbors showing up with chainsaws and trucks and boats. That's the kind of neighbor I am, and they can be lifesavers. But remember, they may also be affected by this event. So there are the spontaneous volunteers that will show up and they'll help clear the roads, but they also are usually affected by the same thing that you are affected by. So they can be lifesavers, but even they can complicate the formal command structure, which just causes problems and static up that food chain, that hierarchy of disaster relief and recovery.
Yes. So before we jump into our next section, one thing that all of these units have in common is their markings. And this is something that not a lot of people understand how it works, but I want to go through the FEMA door markings or building code markings. You know what I'm
Oh,
talking
yeah.
about?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So you know who's alive and how many bodies are inside and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, absolutely. It'd be great if you could tell people how to interpolate that stuff.
Right. So, for anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, if you look at pictures of Katrina post disaster, you'll see a bunch of X's on doors or windows or walls, garage doors, and there's a whole bunch of stuff written in the little negative space of the X. And the way that works is the FEMA search assessment marking system. Um, Basically, there's a single slash from upper left to bottom right that when a team goes in to search a structure, they mark that. And when they do that, they'll mark who they are. So if you see an incomplete X, you know that that is still being searched by that that team. So if it says, PA.TF1, that's Pennsylvania National Guard Task Force 1, they are in that structure. And so they'll put the task force ID. They're supposed to put the date and entry time, but a lot of teams don't do that depending on how fast the searches are compared to how big the disaster is. But if you see just a single slash, that means that it's an ongoing search. When they exit the building, they'll put that crossing slash. So now you have an actual X. And then the top portion of the X, that's their exit date and time in that top field. And any additional information, it all gets placed in the open areas of the X. So the right is hazards. So that could be we found rats in the building, or there was food and water, or there was an electrical hazard, something like that. And then the bottom space of the X, they'll put how many live and how many dead bodies were found. So they'll put like 8L, 3D, or, you know, 2L, 0, or they'll just put 0 if nobody was in the home. And then if you ever see one that looks more like a star, it's because a new search was done. So they'll cross out the previous and put complete new assessment markings on the building. So for example, um, if you were looking at I'm actually looking at a Katrina picture right now, and it has the X with a big circle around it. It says 3-3 in the top, uh, TMP for the unit, and then 0-0. So there were no rats, there was no food and water, there were no bodies found, there were no DOAs, and then they'll also put whether it was an exterior. They'll put EX for exterior survey only, or NE for no entry. They didn't go in. And what those markings mean, you can tell what was searched by who, when, what was found, and whether it might need a research. And you could, in a disaster scenario, if you are looking at secluding yourself or bugging in, grab a can of spray paint and make up your own markings. Go out and spray paint your garage door, and you can actually deter other people from coming in if they know what those markings mean. And if you put something like rats, I have rats in my basement. Well, I'm not going to go in there.
Oh, that's a good idea. I like that. Yeah. So you could actually do like little fake marking if you're trying to not get searched by FEMA.
And if you ever write bio on your house, they'll pretty much just avoid the entire area.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's really interesting. So now, obviously, I want to talk about, you know, the recovery engine that everybody forgets about until they actually need it, and that's your insurance. That is the private insurance. So your insurance company, they are probably not coming until after the dust is settled. Oftentimes, they will want to stage people close so they can go in once it's safe, but adjusters need safe access. They need staging. They need communication lines restored. They generally actually need somewhere to like sleep. So in big events, claims will absolutely bottleneck, and the insurance company, they won't come in until it's actually like state safe and logistically sound and logical for them to show up.
Yeah, and homeowners insurance is not flood insurance, or earthquake insurance or windstorm insurance. These are, in a lot of cases, separate policies. A lot of people still get caught off guard, and most survivors discovered that they have been woefully underinsured or missing key coverage when it comes to their homeowners policy. Something happens and they think, "Oh, I'm covered. I'll just file a claim." That's not exactly how it works. You've got to have the right kind of policy, the right kind of coverage, and you've got to have enough to meet your deductible in terms of damages. I know of hundreds of thousands of claims that have likely been filed that uh, you know, the the amount of damage just barely covers the deductible. So the homeowner ends up paying out just, they get a check for $500 for a new roof.
Yeah, and it just doesn't go anywhere. That's yeah, exactly. And so that claims process, obviously, it can take forever. It can take weeks, months. There are times when it will take longer than that, just depending on what the rebuilding and recovery effort looks like. And even at that, there's some unfortunate things that happen, like with inflation, for example, where building materials may go up between the time that you file a claim and they adjust it, and then obviously down the road, it can be more expensive to rebuild that structure. But now, in a total loss, like a total loss of your home, in a or maybe in a situation where your home just isn't livable, your insurance company will often give upfront payments, but they're going to be super cautious about this because they only want to do it if they're 100% sure it's actually a covered loss. And so, like the flood versus wind example, like where maybe if the wind part of it, the claim is covered, but the flood part isn't, your insurance company may be very hesitant to give you any money up front until they really know how much of that is going to be covered. And that can be a huge issue for people that just think their insurance company is going to show up after a disaster and hand them tens of thousands of dollars to start rebuilding. For example, in the Paradise fires, insurance companies, they showed up and started writing big checks right off the bat. And in some cases, it was like 50% of your limits because they knew fire was covered. And remember, these events can be like a PR super story, or they can be a PR nightmare for an insurance company. And they just don't want the news out there saying, hey, State Farm is paying everybody and Farmers isn't, or something like that. So they need to do the right thing, and they need to do the right thing before the other insurance company does the right thing. But it needs to be covered, and they're not going to just give you money until they're pretty sure that that is a covered loss. So, like in something like Katrina, where flooding isn't covered, but say the wind was covered, like they might not give you anything up front until the adjuster actually shows up and then gets eyes on your property and can say, okay, we know that this wasn't water damage. This was some other damage that is actually covered. So you can't just rely on the insurance company showing up in that, big, State Farm RV or something and showing up and just start passing out checks, because they're going to be cautious and not give you money until they're sure that you actually have a covered loss.
Right. And the way to kind of prep for this is document your belongings now. So back it up digitally, take a picture of your TV, take a picture of the serial number on your TV. Take a picture of your couch, take a picture of your favorite toothbrush or whatever is important to you or expensive. Store that digitally on a cloud. Store policy numbers in multiple places. Know your coverage like the back of your hand. That's the best thing that you can do when it comes to something like this.
Yeah, knowing your coverage, actually reading your insurance policy and knowing how much we've said this so many times that people are probably tired of hearing it, but reading the contract that you signed and knowing what that contract says. And then, yeah, like the video walkthrough of your house is a great one. Take your cell phone, just do a video walkthrough and pan through all your rooms so you can get a good look at all your property because you're going to have to prove what you owned. And if it's a total loss, like a fire or a hurricane that washes everything away, it might be hard to prove what you owned. And so that video walkthrough of the home and showing all your property can be huge after the fact.
Yes, it absolutely can. That's a really good idea. And doing that video walkthrough, um, that's a great way to look and see what you have, where you have it. So if you've got something like a food dehydrator or a freeze dryer that sits in a cabinet most of the time, go ahead and open up the cabinet and just get that on video as you're walking by.
Absolutely. Yeah. Open the cabinets and drawers and show what you have. Most people don't realize like how many hundreds of dollars worth of like spices they have in that one cabinet. Like there's a reason like, Britain invaded the rest of the world. Like it's very expensive, you know what I mean? And people just don't realize that. Or tools are another one. Like you don't realize, Chris, that as an average homeowner, you don't realize that you probably have $5,000 or $10,000 worth of tools in your garage. You just don't think about it because you buy a $20 wrench at a time, but you've been doing that every week for 20 years. So you just don't realize how much property you actually have. So
Our
um,
spice cabinet is probably 1,000, twelve
think
hundred. We've got
think
a
about
lot
that.
of spices.
Yeah, and then the packet drawer, because you got the little soy sauce packs and the Taco Bell spice packs. That's worth something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's talk about the rule of tens.
Okay. So this is a really good rule of thumb for gauging your response.
The rule
So
of
if
recovery.
yes, that's a really good way to put it. I love that. Rule of recovery is the rule of tens. If the disaster lasts 10 minutes, neighbors are saving neighbors, right? That's super easy. If it's 10 hours, now we're talking about small scale organized rescue. If it's 10 days to recover, state and federal assets are fully mobilized. You're going to see FEMA, you're going to see National Guard in your area. If it is 10 months to recovery, community rebuilds are going to start shaping up. You're going to see a change to the terrain of your city and your area because of that reconstruction. And if it's 10 years to recovery, full economic recovery for major disasters is we're looking at without rule of law for a while. It's going to be a challenge. So if it's a 10-minute power outage, go and check on your neighbor. If it's 10 hours, maybe it was a small tornado, or maybe it was a small earthquake, maybe it was a really bad rainstorm. 10 hours to recovery, you're going to see police out, helping. You're going to see EMS and fire trucks doing rescues. 10 days, you're going to start to see FEMA, Red Cross, United Cajun Navy, everyone else. And then we're talking about the major disasters. 10 months, that's probably a major earthquake. 10 years, that's the big one.
Yeah, and recovery is not equal. Not all recoveries are created equal. There's wealth and geography and political attention and insurance coverage, and these all kind of determine who rebuilds quickly and who doesn't rebuild at all. And, a lot of preppers, I think, and myself included, live out in rural areas on purpose. But the downside to living in rural areas is you don't get the attention in a giant disaster because naturally any of those NGOs or government agencies, they're going to put their money and effort and supplies and logistics to where they get the biggest bang for their buck. So they're naturally going to go and try to save people in the city where there's a million people they can help versus coming out to the rural areas and helping just a few people. And that's just kind of simple math. Unfortunately, we chose that lifestyle, but you have to be willing to adapt to that when it comes to recovery efforts.
And that's a really good point. I think that's really where preppers need to kind of shift their mindset, because you don't just plan to survive the event, you have to plan to survive the aftermath. And power shortages, debris everywhere, sewage issues, limited medical care, fuel shortages, shattered supply chains, volunteer surges and fades. It's it's a grind to get through that recovery process and get to the rebuild process. So there's a lot going on that you have to be aware of.
Yeah, and here's the reality is there's definitely always going to be gaps, and there's going to be big gaps between, what do we always talk about? We talk about the food, water, shelter, weapons, warmth, hygiene or sanitation, that kind of stuff, and that's really where you're going to find those gaps in those things that we always prepare for. So, knowing that if there is some kind of disaster, the things that you've just been preparing for and with, that's what's gonna that's what's gonna come in handy now. All of those things we've been telling you to stockpile and all that kind of stuff, that's where you're gonna show up and be a hero because you're ready for this kind of thing. Obviously, in a big disaster situation, there's also going to be like that documentation thing, right? If you want to make sure, like we talked about, you're well documented for your insurance company. You're gonna want to make sure that you had your receipts and your serial numbers and all that kind of stuff. Maybe this is the time to not lose all your guns in that boating accident if they were insured.
Right.
Yeah. So
So I guess if we had to boil this down to one question for every listener to kind of ask themselves, I think it would be, can I function for 2 to 4 weeks without any outside help? You know?
yeah, that's a good question to ask yourself right now is can I function for up to a month without any outside intervention? And this isn't just like, oh, the power goes out tomorrow, can I function? This is the if a disaster strikes. And that's where you have to kind of look at your own personal risk matrix, right? Like if you are somewhere where, an earthquake is more or less likely to happen. Although I think we did a pretty good job of proving that earthquakes can kind of happen everywhere. Um, or it's the forest fire, or it's the flood or the hurricane. It's one of those things. If something like that happens, an actual disaster event, can you last for 4 weeks on your own? And if the answer is no, you need to know where to start. So have a debris removal plan. And this may simply be a really good chainsaw, right? But having that debris removal plan, having that your ID and your insurance documentation, knowing where that is, and then building that neighborhood mutual aid. We've talked about this before, but just knowing who your neighbors are and knowing what neighbors are good at what. Like, for example, I don't own a tractor, but I know which of my neighbors do own a tractor because if something like this happens, then we're going to need that level of help to clear the roads and things like that. So hardening your communications, making sure that you've got whether if it's the ham radio and you know how to use it, or maybe it's that Starlink on backup, and then, prepping for the long term grid down recovery, not just like the disaster itself. And Starlink is interesting. I have Starlink, Chris, for internet, and it's awesome and it's quick. And they just sent out a deal to I probably everybody. If you are a Starlink user, you need to check this out. But what they will do is for an additional $5 a month, they will send you a free Starlink Mini with unlimited super slow data. So it's like 500 kilobits per second or something, like like half a meg, right? Really slow, but it's always working and it's $5 a month. And then if you need to activate that, you pay like 50% for the roaming stuff. So I think like if I wanted 50 gigs of data on that thing, it would cost me, I don't know, like 30 or $40 or something. So to have this backup Starlink, and then if you need to take that and go somewhere else with it or put it on the camper, the RV, that's my kind of my plan is if I find myself somewhere without comms in the camper, I can just fire up this Starlink that's just sitting in the closet and it will work and I will have unlimited comms and internet.
That's a really good backup and a really good way to not only coordinate where you are and let, family know that you're okay, but also for preppers that want to get into the actual response and recovery efforts, particularly if they're a ham radio operator, that's brilliant for maintaining a open and backup communication channel.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
primary is cell phone, alternate is email, contingency is the ham radio, and emergency is Starlink. That's actually really, really solid.
It's part of my pace model because I have Starlink on the house, but if something happened to the house, I have this backup Starlink, and for $5 a month for the peace of mind of just having it, I thought was great. But it is working right now. You can just pull it right out, and without any additional money, it will go slow enough that you could exchange emails. You obviously couldn't you know do VoIP, but you could exchange emails. But having that backup, I think just for that additional, like I said, it's only $5 a month and you get the free Starlink and then that's roaming. So if you do have to bug out, now you've got comms and you could not just have comms for you, but you could have comms for the whole group, for the whole community. So you could even maybe you could monetize that, right? Maybe it's like, hey, I don't have bottled water, but I've got Starlink and I will trade you my password for, some bottles of water or something. But that actually would become a commodity if you were off grid without comms. It would be a very valuable commodity.
It's a dozen 30 carbine rounds per email.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I want a dozen 30 carbine rounds and one P38 can opener for every 30 minutes of Starlink service.
No 556 won't cut it.
No.
So
um
I think it's important to realize as part of this that just like we were talking about last time with the earth as a sheet cake, there are different layers to recovery. So this whole layered system from local has to go up to state, and then state has to go to federal. Then you get the NGOs involved. Basically, as soon as FEMA gets involved, all of the other NGOs that are in the area will jump in, and then it's your insurance. But you've got private groups that are out there. You've got neighbors helping neighbors. You've got all sorts of disaster recovery and response efforts going on. It's very easy to get run over. So don't overwhelm yourself by trying to coordinate more than you can take on, trying to manage your own home, your own family and their safety, and you're out on the road cutting with chainsaw, you can easily overwhelm yourself worrying about them. So make sure that your family and your home is in order and safe first. And your community is going to come in clutch here because your own preparedness, you know, you can teach that to other members of the community and that will help to fill in some of those gaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And help does come. I think that's the take home point here is that, you're not just going to have to lone wolf it forever and ever and ever. Help will eventually come if there is some kind of disaster, but it doesn't come quickly. And it's definitely not going to show up evenly. So prepared individuals and prepared communities are going to recover first and they're going to recover faster because you just had a head start, like you don't need to go to the Red Cross camp because you had a contingency because you knew that your neighbors would let you move in if you had a total loss, and vice versa, or the neighbors with the camper, or maybe you have your own little, tent, your hunting tent or whatever it is, that you've got that in the garage. And if you do need to bug out and the house burns down and you have somewhere to go, you can set up your own structure rather quickly. So all of those kinds of things, this is part of that, I guess the prepper hoarder mentality. But if you have all of this stuff, then you are going to recover faster because you're not going to have to lean on those recovery efforts as hard as everybody else, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. It's like starting on the 50-yard line instead of the 20-yard line.
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Exactly. Like you had a head start because you kind of saw this stuff coming and you said, "Yeah, you know what? I can survive for 72 hours or 96 hours or 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it is." Because you had the ability to do that, then you had a head start in recovery because you had a chainsaw and it was working and you had fuel and you had a backup chain for when you break that first chain, then you don't have to wait for some NGO to show up and help you start cutting trees down and clear the street and all those kinds of things because you just had a head start. And I think that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah. And I think that's about going to wrap up this episode. I know this one's a little on the shorter side, but do you have anything else to add?
Maybe just some housekeeping items. Remember, whenever we say, hey, we'll post a link to that, what we mean is at stakeholderprepping.com. I think people still kind of forget that we do have a website with a blog. So with every single episode, there is a blog entry for that episode that has like the list of all the stuff we talked about. So any of the things that we've talked about on this episode, and we said, oh, yeah, we'll post a link to that. That's where that's going to find itself. So check out the website, check out the blog. And if you want to sign up for our weekly blog, down at the bottom of our website at stakeholderprepping.com, you just you enter your email address and we will send you exactly one email a week with the blog link and a link to the episode, and that's it. We're not spamming you. There's nothing else we send out. It's just that. And then yeah, if you want to buy any of our sweet merch, we do have t-shirts now. We did that for you because a lot of people asked about t-shirts, if we were going to have t-shirts or hoodies or anything like that. And we do have uh a small selection of 10 or 12 items that we have procured, and they've got our cool logos on them. We have a t-shirt that's a limited edition t-shirt, so when those are done, we will never make another one. And we've got some tactical assault flip-flops, which are pretty neat. But there's a couple of cool little pieces of merch we have there on our it's stakeholderprepping.store, but you can get there from stakeholderprepping.com. And then, as always, send us an email. It's very easy. It's stakeholderprepping@gmail.com. And we respond to all of our emails, and we love the feedback and the interaction we get from everybody, and even the corrections. If we say something wrong, I do like it when people reach out and give us some feedback on that too. And we answer all of those emails. We answer them pretty quickly, honestly.
Yeah. And I want to say thank you to all of our listeners. We could not have hit all of the milestones that we have hit without your support. And without you, we don't have a reason to do this podcast. It's just me and AC chatting. So thank you for showing support. And please take 30 seconds of your day, talk to a friend, talk to a family member. Next time you send a text message to your brother or sister, just ask them if they've heard about stakeholder prepping, or maybe talk to your boss. Have a emergency management day at the office and have it be bring your own lunch or a BYOB or whatever it is, and get the whole office involved in planning because it's important. You don't want to be the one person scrounging around digging over everyone else because they were unprepared trying to get out of the office to get home.
Yeah, that's a really good call. And for us, I do like it. We have had a lot of listeners that have shared the show and told us that, hey, I told this person about this person. We really do appreciate that. That's awesome because yeah, we have a lot of subscribers and listeners now, and that is thanks to you guys. And that's not thanks to us, right? We didn't tell anybody about this besides Chris's giant family. But so so yeah, we thank you so much for that. And I think that we do have a good niche. I listen to a lot of prepper podcasts, and Chris and I have both said, we don't want to be religious or political, and we don't want to have the doom and gloom stuff. And so we definitely have kind of found our niche of listeners that just want to listen to solid, actionable intel every week without all of the typical prepper craziness.
Absolutely. Well, that is going to wrap up this week's episode. Come back next week. Again, a completely new topic. But until then, remember, you are your own stakeholder. We'll see you then.